Hi everyone, welcome to Diversity in Practice, working with culturally and linguistically diverse children and young people. I'm Emma Nugent, Information Sharing Project Officer at the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare. Before we begin today, I'd like to make an acknowledgement of country. We would like to acknowledge that we are all joining you today from Aboriginal land. For me, it's Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation. And we pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging, and extend this respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. The Diversity in Practice webinar series has been developed by the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare and explores what good practice looks like when engaging with children and young people from diverse backgrounds and communities. This webinar series is supported by the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing and Family Safety Victoria under the Marram Sector Capacity Building Project. The Marram framework highlights that children are victim survivors in their own right, with their own unique experiences of family violence, including specific threats, risks, protective factors, and risk management approaches. Marram emphasises that all interventions must consider the impacts on each and every victim survivor, including children and young people. This webinar series aims to explore what this means in our practice for our work with children and young people from diverse backgrounds and communities. Furthermore, Marram uses an intersectional lens throughout its tools and practice guidance as a core part of risk assessment. It is important that professionals understand how intersecting factors such as identity, systematic oppression, structural inequality, and discrimination can impact upon the way a child or young person experiences family violence and child wellbeing issues, as well as interacts with the service system as a whole. Today's session will focus on the topic of working with culturally and linguistically diverse children and young people. Children and young people who come from COLD communities may face difficulties or barriers that others do not, and this may impact on the way services respond and how access is granted when working with and to support children and young people. It is important that professionals know how to engage with children safely and effectively about their cultural identity and recognise how their identity shapes their lives and access to support systems, as this may be different from their presenting caregiver. Organisations have obligations to protect a child or young person's connection to culture and community as a means of fostering a strong sense of personal identity and belonging. Supporting connection to culture and community may assist in promoting better outcomes for children and young people. Our speakers today will present on this topic and then we'll have a chance to have a facilitated discussion. Please note that while the question and answer box will remain open for the duration of this webinar, we'll be taking questions on notice. It is important to note that today's discussion will highlight the successes, challenges and learnings that each speaker has encountered in their work with college children and young people. What will be presented to you is still a work in progress, and while we don't promise to bring you easy answers or solutions, what we will bring is an open conversation where audience members and presenters alike can reflect on their practice and work together to create better outcomes for college children and young people. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. From the Working Together project, we have Amy and Kudzi. Amy is a bilingual CMY multicultural youth worker working in partnership with Anglicare Victoria to deliver the Working Together mutual capacity building project. Amy's background includes specialist youth mental health, as well as project implementation in the mental health reform and lived experience space. Amy has experience working in communities across Victoria and overseas. Kudzi is a Zimbabwean-born Australian living and working on Wurundjeri land. Kudzi has experience working directly with families as a family services practitioner, as well as in project management, currently working as a project officer. She holds a Master of Social Work and a Bachelor of Pharmacy degrees and a graduate certificate in project management. And from the Restart project, we have Kimberly and Ryan. Kimberly is an Indian Australian and lives on Wurundjeri land. Kimberly holds a Bachelor of Youth Work and has experience working in the out-of-home care sector and with refugee and migrant young people. Kimberly's current role with CMY is Multicultural Youth Worker in the AVIS Restart program, working in partnership with Melbourne City Mission. And last but not least, Ryan is the team leader for Melbourne City Mission's Restart and Reconnect programs. Ryan has experience working across youth sector and adult homelessness. I'll pass to our speakers for today's presentations in just a moment, But first, a few notes on housekeeping. Audience members' microphones and cameras will remain off by default for the duration of today's session. And just a reminder that today's session is being recorded. There is a content warning for our discussion today, so please ensure you reach out for professional support if this raises any issues. We have some resources posted in the chat for you. Now I'd like to pass over to our presenters today. From the Centre for Multicultural Youth, Melbourne City Mission and Anglicare, we'll be presenting on working with culturally and linguistically diverse children and young people. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Emma, for that introduction. Today, myself and Kudzi will be speaking about the Working Together project, which aims to strengthen access and responses to young people from multicultural backgrounds seeking family violence support. So a little bit about the project's background. Distributed by Family Safety Victoria, the grant we've received looks at strengthening the family violence service system's response to multicultural communities. And some of those priority areas that have been included but aren't limited to are regional and rural communities, newly arrived and newly settled communities, child and young people from multicultural communities, as well as women and girls experiencing or at risk of experiencing dowry abuse, female genital cutting, or forced marriage. So the Working Together Mutual Capacity Building project, which is a partnership between CMY and AV, aims to increase access to culturally safe and appropriate family violence support for multicultural young people. It also aims to increase specialist family violence and youth sector practitioner confidence to engage and respond to multicultural young people experiencing family violence. The project only commenced in February 2023, so we are very early on in the piece, and we aim to have this completed by April 2024. So we want to make it really clear today that this by no means makes us experts in this space. But what we do know from consultation and the evidence base that does exist is that there are large gaps for multicultural young people within the service system. So our key project activities include the identification of data trends, gaps and intersectional considerations to be addressed based on the new and existing evidence documented in a desktop review, consultations with multicultural young people, consultations with specialist family violence and youth services, leading to the development and evaluation of a young people and sector-informed best practice framework that will be launched to the sector in April 2024. And of course, the development and delivery and evaluation of capacity building activities for CMY and Anglicare Victoria sector workers. So although we are very early on in our consultation stage, some of the themes that we are hearing from young people and important factors to consider so far include that important piece of valuing the diversity of experience. Multicultural young people in Australia are diverse, and so some examples of this diversity and experience may include, but really are not limited to, young people born in Australia with both parents born in Australia, and this may include those whose families have been in Australia for a number of generations. Young people born in Australia with at least one parent born overseas, and of course born overseas, so young people born outside of Australia. And why this is being identified as important so far is to ensure that when we are working with multicultural young people, we understand the diversity in this experience and that there is not a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to working in this space. And so we really need to ensure that any implicit bias or stereotypes about communities are really left at the door. An example we have found in our recent CMY report through consultation with young people is, however, that some newly arrived young people often grapple with perceived conflicts between their emerging knowledge of family violence as defined by the laws and policies in Australia and potentially the attitudes and behaviours of their family or their community. Young people often sit with the complexity of navigating cultures, which can create pressure within a family dynamic. But as well as this, we think it's really important to acknowledge that multicultural young people hold rich knowledge and insights about these experiences. So one of the questions we have been asking young people so far is how they define family. And family, of course, may be defined in different terms for different communities and different individuals. Some definitions from young people we have consulted with include family being people you trust, some people you love, and some people you can go home to, that friends can be family, and of course the importance of extended family such as uncles, aunties, and cousins. Another factor that has come out through consultation is that the location of family may also vary. So family may live in the home, but someone may also have family overseas, which is really important to consider. So what we've found here is that family can be defined beyond that of the nuclear Western model within the service system, and that's really important. Another consideration is concepts such as chosen family being really important, but really it's about staying curious and ensuring that we respect the young person as the expert of their own experience.
So, as this series encourages good practice within the MARAM, our findings from consults with young people and professionals will be contextualised within MARAM responsibilities. So, early discussions from those in the specialist family violence sector are suggesting that young people are very rarely presenting to these services outside being referred under a caregiver. And this has been very much mirrored by young people in our consultations who are reporting that there's various reasons why they're not reaching out to these services. And this could be either low visibility of services, fear of unknown services, fear of consequences from families and communities, and ultimately a fear that services may not be culturally inclusive, aware, or understanding. So we'll talk about a few measures practitioners and organisations can take to enhance the engagement with young people. So an example of this could be based on feedback from one professional who told us that the corporate presentation of some of the places that we work in can generally be very intimidating to people, but especially young people from multicultural backgrounds. And those from cultures who might have very clear customs around hierarchy and authority. So you might have a young person who is already extremely suspicious of your involvement with the family and maybe already fearful of services and may not want to talk to you at all. So engagement could look like meeting them in places where they feel safe and comfortable and thinking very flexibly about what that could look like. So for example, youth hubs, sporting clubs, or a massive favorite of mine, McDonald's. I'm not sure if that's for me or if it's for the young person, but I digress. So you could think about also bringing a young person, another person that they trust. So that could be a trusted friend or a worker they've already built a good relationship with to provide that soft entry into your service. When we talk about culturally curious practice, Emerging Minds explains that curious practice places the young person as an expert in their own lives, including that of the way that they experience their own culture. This could look like informing yourself about their cultural background, but ensuring that you're also very curious and inquire about the way that they may experience their own culture, as this may differ based on the experiences that they've had so far, whether that's pre or post settlement, and also their experience of, the systems in a new place. So this also depends on workers examining their own assumptions and their biases. And this definitely builds shared understanding, which paves the way for trust to grow. And trust is definitely a theme that has been coming up repeatedly during consultation as a conduit to good practice and good engagement. A somewhat surprising finding from one of our group of young people that we've spoken to was that the term family violence just does not resonate with them at all. Whilst we're yet to confirm if this is generalizable to other groups of young people we're consulting with, it does introduce some practice consideration around identifying family violence as per MARAM responsibility too. This is particularly important as developing a shared understanding of family violence is essential to identifying it, and we're seeking to identify language that young people may actually resonate with that explains violence within the home. Some terms that young people reported were recognizable were terms such as discipline and abuse. One young person raised a very interesting point around they want to be able to conceptualize respectful relationships in the family, the way that respectful relationships are being taught in schools in that intimate partner violence space. Adding to that, conversations with sector workers tell us that young people may not present directly with family violence concerns, but they may be seeking support, including but not limited to mental health. But because of this, it does take a lot of skill from practitioners to listen out to those very covert signs of family violence. So it may also be useful to expand the ways in which violence can present in multicultural communities, as there may be unique forms such as Jari-related violence, the ways in which discipline can occur, and the ways in which young people may be made to take on financial and domestic responsibilities. There's also different terms or language that is used around this as well. A foundation of cultural competence allows practitioners to be informed in the ways in which family violence may present outside, that Western and Australian definitions of family violence. And then on top of that, that cultural curiosity provides opportunities to explore ways in which young people will identify family violence within their personal cultural contexts. Whilst responsibilities 3, 4, 7, and 8 may vary across the sector, there's some very common themes that are emerging. In their work researching the perspectives of children and young people that have experienced family violence, Doctors McGowan, Fitzgibbon, and Stewart found that young people were calling out for individualized risk assessments that weren't centered around their caregivers because their perceptions of risk can absolutely very much differ from those of their caregivers. Within our consultations, we're analysing whether this rings true to multicultural young people, and especially where culture may play a role in the ways young people assess and determine their own risks. This can be illustrated in this diagram, where young people may be weighing up a risk to their safety with huge risk of disconnection to their families, their communities, their culture, and ultimately their identity. This is especially important when we know that in some communities, disclosures and discussions outside of the family around family violence can lead to families or individuals being ostracized from their communities and their families. As such, consideration could be given to how culture can impact risk assessment as well as risk management. So part of this is that when sharing risk assessments, Emerging Minds suggested that it is important that cultural information be included in risk assessments, including descriptions and narratives of identity, of language needs, and of other cultural needs. This could look like highlighting and explaining connection to culture as a protective factor, for example, or risk factors such as mistrust of formal services as well. So young people are telling us that issues within the family, including those relating to family violence, are very much managed within the family unit. Amongst others, these two factors may influence the ways in which conversations take place around information sharing, which relates to responsibility 6. As is the case around our duty to inform clients about privacy and confidentiality in ways that they understand, the same can be said about the ways in which we explain the purpose and benefits of information sharing in an open and transparent way that leaves little room for interpretation and fear. If you are an information sharer, or if you've been requested to share information, there are absolutely opportunities here to ensure that narratives around information about a young person's cultural needs are communicated between services. This could be presented to young people as a benefit because not only are they repeating, they're not having to repeat their stories over and over again, but it's an opportunity for their cultural needs to be shared to hopefully pave the way for culturally safer experiences with other services. For the last MARAM responsibilities 5 and 10, relating to consultation and collaboration, it is important for us to acknowledge that there are certainly systemic limitations that practitioners must work within that can at times make it difficult to access timely consultation or collaborate with other organisations. In light of this, we want to put it back on you. We implore you to question whether we are working together to provide collaborative services to young people. When it comes to cultural consultations, several practitioners so far have reported that In Touch is providing amazing informative consults that have provided practitioners with invaluable information about keeping culture central to engagement and also embedding it within their service provision. Whilst it is not a formal way to consult, again, placing young people as the experts in their own lives, including around their culture and cultural needs, is a way to tap into rich cultural information that is highly individualized to them and the way that they experience and perceive their culture. As mentioned before, it is worth identifying the people or services that young people trust and consider whether they may be appropriate to either consult or collaborate alongside those in the specialist family violence sector. Some practice examples could be, within a care team meeting. Cultural knowledge and information could be shared and discussed with other providers to ensure each professional within the care team is aware of a person's cultural needs and how they intersect with their experience of family violence. So these are just a few examples of some of the papers that we have been reading and assessing as part of our desktop review. And I think, they do provide a very rich, good knowledge base for, if you have the time to go and have a look. And so these will be linked in the information pack for people to have a read of. And so if anyone in your organizations or yourself personally or in your networks would like to collaborate further with us, and that could look like formal consultation, that could look like, reviewing our framework, please do not hesitate to contact us. And these are some of our details and also the details of our supervisors. And part of this will be being a little bit cheeky and sending out a survey as well, just to get a little bit of further information about how people are working with young people in this space. And so that will be sent out in the information pack as well. And thank you. And over to you, Kim and Ryan.
Kudzi and Amy. I think Kim is just going to add the slides for us. There we go. Cool. We might go to the first slide after that. So thanks everyone for coming along to the webinar. So my name's Ryan Webb. I'm from Melbourne City Mission, and I'll be co-presenting today with Kimberly. She is employed by CMY, but we work together in collaboration on the Restart program, which is an adolescent violence in the home program, which kicked off about the start of this year. I'll get you to go to the next slide there as well, please, Kim. So just a bit of an overview. I actually like to also just start as well and acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I'm on Wurundjeri land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that are with us today. I'd also like to acknowledge and pay respect to the strength of the young people and the families that we work with, along with the victims we've lost to family violence, as well as any victim survivors joining the webinar today. So the Restart program that we're operating at the moment works with young people who are using family violence in the home. The program aims to reduce harm, support change and improve safety and connection within families. Our program covers the Brimbank and Milton local government areas, and we work with young people aged 12 to 17. As I mentioned earlier, the program is run in partnership between Melbourne City Mission and Centre for Multicultural Youth. So Kim, we're lucky to have her as part of the program. She provides support to multicultural young people in the area. But I'll pass over to Kim for the first part of the presentation.
Thanks, Ryan, and good morning, everyone. So in this presentation, we have reflected on our practice in accordance with the MARAM responsibilities. What you will notice is we have found working on the ground in the Restart program is consistent with the findings from Amy and Quincy's research. So firstly, how do we establish respectful, sensitive and safe engagement? When working with multicultural communities, we consider how young people and families define family and home. Who is part of the family as opposed to who lives at home? This widens the question of family violence, as we know it can take place from extended family and family overseas. Think financial abuse, coercive control, forced marriage, dowry abuse, etc. It is important to recognize that the young people or families' connections and ties to their community could have been affected through the issue of family violence. For example, a faith community that may not acknowledge that they are a victim survivor. We have had a family who have had to shrink their social circle due to the shame they feel and are left feeling isolated. Unpacking the family's understanding of mental health and the shame and stigma they carry around this is essential. We have found the process of giving parents space to offload before trying to get them to empathize with their child's shame and guilt associated with the cultural baggage useful. Of course, we can only name the layers that young people hold once they have established trust. Looking at key people and relational dynamics now. Identifying who the young person is closest to in the family is useful, as this can often give us an idea of relational dynamics and who the young person may disclose to and who they trust. This could be someone not living at the home. We know that things can get lost in language, nuances such as tech abuse. In some cultures, it is seen as the parents' right to discipline their kids however they see fit. However, this discipline can be categorized as family violence. We discern with the family what is understood by the terms violence and family violence. Being curious and asking open-ended questions we have found to be an essential tool. However, we know that there is a fine line between being inquisitive and probing, especially at this intersection. So, holding a therapeutic and trauma-informed lens as we do this. We have to be explicit and ask those pointy questions in relation to safety planning. How safe are you really? For instance, in our program, we might ask a parent, are you afraid of your young person or afraid they might hurt themselves or someone else? Language used to describe young people's behavior gives us an insight into how they are seen. Words used to describe or downplay issues, such as discipline in the home, paints a picture of what is happening. When working with an interpreter, we ask for the exact words being used. We are also mindful that we may have to use an interpreter from a different community so as there's more openness. We consider how traditions, practices, and culture impact on gender roles, family routine, family values, family structure, and accept that young people may hold some of these gendered roles. We are respectful and sensitive to these dynamics, but shine a light where family violence exists. From our small sample size, we have found that majority of multicultural families are not entering the system through traditional family violence or mental health services. We have accepted referrals coming through from a variety of professionals, for example, a pediatrician, a lawyer, and crisis accommodation service. We were strategic in canvassing a broad range of services and supports when creating awareness of the program, such as schools, clinics, and community settings. Some of our considerations when conducting risk assessments with multicultural families. We consider a young person's we consider young people and their families' understanding of adolescent violence, such as yelling or slamming of the doors may be overlooked. We also consider what is teenage behaviour and what tips into family violence. In the AVID space, it is pointing out what is just letting off steam and what is being violent. We hold relationship building and trust at the core of our work as we take a whole of family approach. We are not working as youth workers or family workers. We hold each family member in their own right and work with the moving parts they all present. It is not family therapy. It can be one-on-one with the parent, with siblings, with the young person, or all together. We consistently check in with young people and their families around safety, as this can fluctuate. We've worked with parents who were looking to wind down engagement with the program due to their young person's improved behaviour. However, when we check in with them a week or two later, the problems have re-emerged.
Thanks, Kim. So I'll talk a little bit about collaborative risk assessment. So sharing risk within the care team is really important to ensure the best outcomes for young people and their families. We recognise that whilst, for example, we may have knowledge in the multicultural youth workspace, we're still on a learning path in the family violence space. Would also like to acknowledge that we're all still learning in the adolescent violence spaces too. We often rely on secondary consults to fill in the gaps and strengthen our assessments when we may not have the knowledge. We've benefited from connections internally within MCM with family violence workers, as well as the Orange Door. It's important to encourage strong care teams when we're working with our multicultural young people, as well as any other teams around them, student support groups. We just need to make sure that there's strong communication and shared responsibility for risk management in particular, as well as having that broader oversight. As Kudti touched on earlier, it's important to capture your young person and family's connection to their culture and how this becomes a factor in identifying risk as well, and how it intersects with family violence. We take a whole of family approach through the Restart program. So through working with this approach, we can gather information that may sometimes get lost or silenced as other organisations are working individually. You might have organisations that are working with the mother as a victim survivor, maybe potentially the father as a perpetrator, or the younger children and siblings through child protection. We found that we've tried to incorporate siblings a lot into the work that we're doing because we feel like they can be overlooked as well, and it's important to understand their perspective about what's going on if another sibling's using violence, particularly regarding relationship repair if the violence is being directed towards them. And I guess in the multicultural context as well, it's really important to keep in mind extended family, as they can, family can be defined beyond our Western notions. If I go to the next slide there, please, Kim. So consultation and collaborative work. So cultural services, really important, I guess, for us all to link in with those services. So as mentioned before, In Touch, a fantastic family violence cultural organisation, Australian Vietnamese Women's Association, places like that. I think as workers in the space as well, it's important to do your groundwork about the community that you're working with. Every culture has its unique and nuances, and we just need to be aware of assumptions that we can make as well, and the moving parts of intersections in this work as well across cultures. We've been looking to culturally appropriate mentors. We find this is a really powerful way for young people to connect with their culture and in turn build their self-esteem as well, which can be one of the areas of focus within the adolescent violence space. As mentioned a bit earlier, secondary consults are really important, particularly culturally specific services. Outside of that as well, just more generally speaking, in the adolescent violence space, liaising with disability services, parenting, family services, mental health services. We found we've got some of the culturally and linguistically diverse families that we've worked with may not be as familiar with these services as well as some of the other people that we work with, so we really aim to support them through that. And as we've touched on already, the care teams, it's really important to have that strong relationship rather than working in silos. I'll go to the next slide there, Kim, if that's all right. So info sharing. So it's really important for us to be transparent about our duty and care, duty of care when we're working with these families and young people. In Restart, we ensure that this is an ongoing conversation as well, and that young people and families understand what it all means. So this has included updating our rights and responsibilities that are provided to young people at intake, so that this forms part of the conversation and it's not just a sort of tick box exercise. Providing comprehensive assessments is really important to account, particularly, I think it was already mentioned as well in the previous with Amy and Kudzi, accounting for those cultural nuances and sensitivities that might be present in the situation, and sort of sharing that knowledge amongst the care team as well. Cultural safety versus risk. So whilst we want to uphold the young person and family's cultural safety, we need to ensure that we're not missing those issues of risk. So sometimes that looks like educating families about legalities around people being safe, whether that be within the home or in the community. In some communities, issues and disagreements may traditionally be handled within the community or family rather than involving services or professionals outside of the community like police or other CSOs. So that's pretty much it for the bulk of our presentation. I was just going to put in a quick plug there as well. If you're working with any young people as well that you think might be suited to this program, feel free to get in touch with us. We obviously work within the Brimbank and Melton LGAs, but yeah, I think Emma might be able to shoot through our contact details for that. But thanks very much for your time.
Amazing. Thank you so much, all of you, for your valuable insights on working with this group of young people. I think all of your work is serious professionals in the space and in supporting their practice with working with children and young people who are culturally and linguistically diverse going forward. I think we'll now move on to some questions. So just a reminder for our audience that while we do have the Q&A box open for the duration of this webinar, we will be taking questions on notice. However, we are developing a question and answer sheet for our post-webinar information pack. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to enter them into this question and answer box, and all our panelists today will have a look at them and we'll add them in with our post-webinar comments, as I said. So with that being said, I think we'll get started with our first question today. I think we'll start with Ryan and Kim. What I was interested in is what necessary skills and tools do professionals need to effectively build trust and rapport with college children and young people?
So I touched on this earlier in the presentation. So doing your homework on the particular culture or community you're working with, being aware of traditions, religious holidays, customs, understanding the family dynamic, and being aware of gender roles, we have found as important skills and tools.
That's amazing. Thank you, Kim. Amy and Kudzi, What are some common misconceptions about college children and young people, and how can professionals challenge these in their work? I know we've touched on this a little bit.
Yeah, and I'm happy to take that, Emma. I think it is really important, as Amy mentioned at the start of the presentation, that there is so much diversity in what multiculturalism means, and that can span, families that have been here for generations, families that are newly arrived. And so within that, each person is experiencing their culture in very different ways. If I use myself as an example, I was born in Zimbabwe, but have lived here most of my life. And so, I'm in between two cultures, and a lot of young people and children are very much in that space. And so the way that we experience culture is very individualized based on our experiences. And so as a professional working with young people, I think it's really important to, I guess, be informed about, the general culture, but certainly be open to the young person and or children not, I guess, experiencing that culture in that exact way that you may have found out or you might have consulted about. And so just being really curious about what that actually looks like for that young person or that child, and asking them and being curious to make sure that, you are capturing that very highly individualized view and perception of their culture.
Great, thank you. And thank you for sharing your experience too. I think this lends itself nicely to our next question, which looks at working with children and young people as clients in their own right. Kim and Ryan, I know you do a lot of whole family work, as you said in your presentation then. So what I'm really interested in is how can professionals ensure that their work with children and young people is as clients in their own right?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. So I guess in the program, we have the young person at the centre of our work, making sure that we're working with them in a non-judgmental way, but still holding young people to account to avoid collusion and things like that. We hold the young person in that positive regard as well. I guess outside of the young person, respectfully challenging the family if they're talking about the language that they're using to describe the young person's behaviour as well. Because we know how that can affect young people's self-esteem. Amy and Kudzi mentioned it as well, but it's the classic young people are experts in their own lives, so particularly around culture, we need to be open to learn about their culture. Obviously, there's an onus on us to educate ourselves about the culture, but there's so much we can learn about that young person's unique experience of their culture too.
Great, thank you. I think this was a theme that we saw a lot in your presentations as well, is that there's an onus on us to learn, but there is also a lot of silos that we see within our work and the sectors we work with. So Amy and Kudzi, what I'm interested in knowing and learning about is, where do you see gaps in collaboration across the service system when supporting college children and young people? And additionally, how can these be addressed?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. I think the big gaps that we're seeing through consultation and also hearing from multicultural young people who are very aware of these gaps is the gaps in the service system for young men who are victim survivors in their own right as well, kind of reporting that primarily these services are focused on women and children, and so victim survivors who are young men are not really sure where to go or what would be available for them. And then on the other side of that is that the services supporting women and children are not necessarily directly working with young people as victim survivors in their own right. And then as a layer on top of that, kind of ethno-Pacific services, there is limited kind of funding potentially in those areas. So there are services available, but there are long wait times. And so these are some of those big gaps. But the lack of direct connection in particular, which is how I think some of our projects have come about, between those youth services, community services, and then the family violence service system and sector. And so when we're looking at, I think, how can we address some of these gaps? Yes, there is kind of that system level collaboration, which we can all work towards and strive towards. But I think also, and I think we've all mentioned this a few times, there is that reflection on individual practice. You know, what am I doing to collaborate with my local community? You know, when am I going to seek out knowledge and information about what services are available locally for the identified needs of someone I'm working with? And so I think that emphasis on, yes, there's a system level gaps and we can work and collaborate where we can, but also owning that as an individual practitioner in whatever industry we're kind of working in, to kind of support that collaboration where possible.
Thanks, Amy. These are some really great points and questions that I think everyone can take away with them today to with their own reflection and see where they can help out as well. I think that also lends really nicely to our next question. You mentioned that young people may not know where to go to disclose what they're going through and talk about their experiences. But what I'm interested in hearing from Ryan and Kim about is how can cultural factors influence the disclosure of abuse or trauma by coloured children and young people, and how can professionals create a safe, supportive environment for this disclosure? Where can they go? What can they do?
Thanks, Emma. So yeah, within some cultures, there can be sometimes a distrust of outside support. So being transparent about our reporting requirements is important. This can sometimes make it difficult to get a clear picture from the family about what is occurring. When working with the young person, being respectfully curious, as we mentioned in our presentation, being transparent about what you will and won't do with that particular information is really helpful. Obviously, ask questions in a safe environment, and continue regular safety check-ins with the young person and family. And lastly, refer to appropriate supports.
Thanks, Kim. I think there's some really great points as well that practitioners can take away with them today from this webinar. Moving on to our next question, I think it's also it's a little bit related to the last one. So now that you've got this young person who's willing to disclose, and you've got professionals who are willing to create a safe and supportive environment for this disclosure, how can organisations and professionals ensure that services are culturally sensitive and responsive to the needs of coloured children and young people? I think I'll direct this towards Amy and Kudzi, see what their thoughts are.
Thanks, Emma. Happy to speak to this one. I think one part, and I think we're kind of repeating this throughout both presentations, really is that self-reflection piece as a professional, understanding that role of power and privilege, and how that comes to play in the service systems or in the services that we are working in, and our own roles within that. So yes, it is kind of that staying curious piece and making sure we are informing ourselves. But I guess on terms of a practical considerations for services might also be that engagement and investment in culturally responsive training. So for example, CNY do offer training that will provide people a bit more of an opportunity as a team or as a service to sit and reflect in that space a little bit about, you know, what does cultural sensitivity and responsive practice mean for them? You know, what does that look like in their service delivery? And so these are some examples of, you know, that investment to support some of that service and systemic change that we hope we can see as well for multicultural young people.
Great, thanks, Amy. And the cultural sensitivity training that Amy mentioned just then will be included in our information pack that we do send out after this webinar, so please do keep your eyes peeled for that. On the topic of resources, we did receive a lot of questions from attendees prior to this webinar who were just looking for something to support their practice when working with this cohort. So Ryan and Kim, what resources or tools are available to assist professionals in better supporting coloured children and young people who have experienced trauma?
Well, I think like Amy touched on as well, things around culturally responsive training, like what CMY or other organisations offer. But yeah, I think like across the sector and outside of the sector, like in schools, for example, building trauma-informed awareness is really important, and sort of if you can find somewhere that offers that cultural lens to that as well, and how trauma and culture intersect, particularly amongst young people, I'll jump on that. I think any cultural mentor services, cultural groups of parents, and relevant cultural community services are always really good to tap into. I think I know, like CMY have community support groups for South Sudanese young people, Lamana Pacifica community as well. So yeah, Foundation House as well provides support to survivors of torture and trauma as well. So yeah, all of those things are good to consider.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. I think that's all I have for questions today. Thank you all so much for your rich insights. I'm sure everyone here found that very useful, as I did today. So I hope that all attendees can take away something at least from all of the presentations and questions and answers we heard today. I think we might wrap up here and give all our attendees some time back in their day. So thank you for joining us for the second webinar of Diversity in Practice. Before we wrap up, I'd like to highlight that a complimentary tip sheet has been developed to support the content of this webinar. This tip sheet aims to assist in building the capacity of workforces to apply an intersectional lens when working with children and young people from diverse backgrounds, and in the assessment and management of family violence and child wellbeing issues. So all registered attendees will be sent a copy of this tip sheet with a recording of the webinar, along with any other relevant resources mentioned today. So we'll ensure to include a copy of the cultural sensitivity training that Amy and both Ryan mentioned, as well as the survey that Lizzie mentioned today for the Working Together project. We do have 2 other webinars coming up as part of this series. So we have Working with LGBTQIA+ children and young people. That's happening next Monday on the 29th at 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. We'll be hearing from Alan and Larissa from Berry Street. And then we've also got Understanding Intersectionality. Now, this webinar has been rescheduled to later in June, so that's now on the Wednesday, 28th of June at 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. and it'll be presented by AIMS Australia. So links to register to attend these webinars can be found in the chat. A survey will also appear at the end of this session, so if you could please complete this short survey to let us know your thoughts on today's webinar, that would be appreciated, as well as completing Amy's and Kudzi's survey. That would be great too, if you could. So thank you again for attending today's webinar, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks.